right, so today my name is Sandra Kosek-Sills. I'm with the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. Let me see if I can turn the camera on just for a moment here and say hello to everybody, and then we'll go back to sharing the screen so that we're not too much with the bandwidth. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Ohio's Domestic Action Plan, the update for 2023. This is a partnership between multiple state agencies, the Lake Erie Commission, Ohio EPA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, and Ohio Department of Natural Resources, who I am assured are also working on their logo, new logo, but don't have it yet. So what we're going to be doing today, so this is our first time trying this in hybrid mode. If you have questions or comments, you can drop them in the chat. We will be able to unmute folks who are online when we come to a point where there's time for questions and answers. What I'd like to do in the beginning part of the presentation, when the state agencies are mostly doing presentations, if you could do questions related to content that's being presented and hold all of the discussion and commentary on the plan itself for the discussion at the end, so that we're able to more clearly capture your comments and to try to stay on time. So at this point, we're going to go through a welcome presentations, have a little break, do a little bit more presentations, and then we'll talk, do some discussion. So I want to turn it over to Joy. If you can go ahead and unmute yourself and give your part of the welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Mullinex, and I am the director of the Ohio Lake Erie Commission. So on behalf of myself and Sandra, thank you all for making time to join us this afternoon. So Sandra gave a little bit of a primer on what we're going to do, and just by way of background, the commission is comprised of the directors of 6 state agencies, including the Ohio EPA, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Agriculture, which are partners on nutrient management and Ohio's Domestic Action Plan. Because of the commission's role as a coordinator on Lake Erie, the commission through Sandra has taken the lead on Ohio's Domestic Action Plan. Though we recognize that the work included in our DAP is shared among many of us in state, federal, local, and non-governmental organizations. So please excuse my in-person absence, but I'm excited to hear today's conversation. And as she mentioned, Sandra has left time in today's schedule for questions and comments, though if something comes to you after today's session, always feel free to reach out to us later with additional thoughts. So thank you again for joining us.
All right, thanks, Joy. All right, so with a little bit more context, what we're doing here at the state, this is under the purview of the U.S. federal DAP. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement is between the U.S. federal government and the Canadian federal government as the parties to the agreement. However, on the U.S. side, what we're doing is we are working, the federal government is working with the states. So Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania all have state domestic action plans. It helps us to clearly delineate what our responsibilities and our authorities are at the state level and part of this effort. And so our pieces will be summarized in the U.S. Domestic Action Plan, and they are also working on doing their update, and their drafting process is underway. They are waiting for the states to get farther along in the state processes before a U.S. federal DAP will be available. So where are we trying to go with our goals? Just to hit briefly on the overarching themes. So Annex 4 of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement is what calls for these domestic action plans. And the general goals written as ecosystem objectives are for the Western Basin to reduce the amount of cyanobacteria biomass to mild levels 90% of the time. And for the Central Basin to keep the oxygen concentration in the water of at least 2 milligrams per liter in the bottom waters during the summer stratified period. Both of those have been translated into overall loading targets for the lake. And then each state, each federal government has a portion, each state has a portion, depending on which areas within the watershed are within their boundaries. And that information is provided in the goals portion of the domestic action plan, what all of those numbers break down to be. And we'll have more discussion about targets in a little bit. And just a quick refresher, the focus in Ohio's DAP has been on 4 primary sets of actions. This is not the whole universe of them, but these are the main ones. Agricultural best management practices is the primary one. Wetland restoration and enhancements, community support for home sewage treatment system remediation, and also looking at point sources. And the 4th part is watershed planning, which includes distributing the load reduction across the Maumee watershed to help with local planning and local efforts to do nutrient reductions in those areas. So the plans are due for update in 2023. Drafts underway at the federal level. The states will also be doing domestic action plans. New York has some watershed in Lake Erie, but they have such a small area that there is part of the U.S. federal domestic action plan. The state plans will be nearing completion. Ontario and Canada do their plan as a joint effort, and theirs will be a little bit farther along. So what have we done since 2020? There's a document update dated October 2022 that's on our DAP page at lakeerie.ohio.gov. So that sort of brought us up to last year. We have additional actions that have happened since then. I will be updating that table. But for the most part, again, the first strategy is actions to address nutrients lost from agriculture. We know that our agricultural non-point source is our primary source. So there's been a lot of work done on that. We've finalized the list of BMPs, which is what became H2 Ohio. We have been doing robust implementation of H2 Ohio. This is now in its 3rd budget cycle. It's open now, enrolling for these areas. I think that's right. Kirk, I think it's through December, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so enrolling now through December for some of these existing areas. There's plans for expansion of H2 Ohio outside of the Western Lake Erie Basin that will enable some of the counties in the rest of the Lake Erie Basin to participate should there be interested parties. It will be going statewide at a smaller level. And then there has been an expansion of the Lake Erie Conservation Reserve program that is ODNR is providing additional funding to those farmers who put land aside for conservation and in more of a habitat friendly type land cover when they're not needing it for production. So there will be supplemental monies for that to help get to the acreage goals that have been set for that in the past. And then the fertilizer certification, which was something that kicked off one of the very first things that the state had done back in 2016, 2017, to get all of the fertilizer applicators certified so that they would understand their best practices. And that is now a program they're moving into a recertification process. So quite a lot of activity that has been going on under H2 Ohio for our ag lands. For strategy 2, actions to restore wetlands, we've had nearly 9,000 acres restored just in the Lake Erie watershed under H2 Ohio. And I think you will see in the H2 Ohio documentation, it's generally the statewide information. So I have wrangled out of ODNR some Lake Erie specific statistics for us today. And so you can see that there has been a lot of focus on that, and also nutrient reduction information that is associated with that, which is also reported out under H2 Ohio. Also, I wanted to just point out in Sandusky Bay, the Sandusky Bay Initiative had been going on for some number of years now, and we're very excited that there's construction actually happening. Scudder, are there other projects underway or nearing completion, or is this like still the main?
Well, the Cedar Point Causeway Wetland Project that's the image that's on the screen. You see, just put the second placement of 140,000 cubic yards of dredge material. Need another year or so. We'll be working toward grading it and then developing a wetland, a flow-through wetland, which will improve water quality, but also the habitat. We have additional funding. In fact, the agreements were just signed by our director for several major projects in the Inner Bay and Sandusky Bay and the Pickle Creek area. Innovative nature-based designs designed to actually capture some of the flow from some of the smaller tributaries behind wetlands, behind a barrier, of course, barrier island system. It's also designed to attenuate or absorb wave energy. A lot of the loadings that we say, especially in the Inner Bay, are driven by resuspension. So if we can start reducing some of the wave energy in certain areas, we can create clear water and potentially restore some of the wetlands that used to exist there in the 1930s and 40s that are now gone. So it's an innovative approach, but we think over the long term, we will be able to fundamentally alter Sandusky Bay and improve its water quality and the habitat conditions significantly.
Yep. So a lot of work going on there. That's good to see. And the third strategy, actions to reduce community sources. This has not been a primary focus because this is also a relatively small source. However, there has been funding for home sewage treatment systems remediation that was supplemented by H2 Ohio funding. There has been a lot of work going on kind of quietly in the background at Ohio EPA to do phosphorus optimization at various NPDES facilities. We have a long list of examples of that in the Appendix C of the new DAP 2023, if folks want to take a look at that. And also there's an interactive map of H2 Ohio water infrastructure projects available. There's quite a lot of information at h2.ohio.gov. So if you click on each agency's website, you can go through and see a lot of the details of actions that have happened. And then under strategy 4, using watershed planning, quite a lot going on here as well. You can see on the map, we are beginning to get significant portions of the Maumee watershed under our what we would call a NPSIS plan, non-point source implementation strategy, which is 9-element watershed plans under the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. So this is very much focused on stream work, looking for critical areas where projects can go in to help restore and protect streams. I think we're not quite at halfway, but beginning to approach about half of the number of HUC 12s there. So quite a lot of work being done. And also a lot of them, we are using the targets. We take the big target for the Maumee watershed, and in the DAP 2020 had identified for each HUC 12 what that load reduction would look like. So most of these plans now are getting information into them to talk about how much load reduction is needed in that particular watershed. And it does vary depending on, most of these watersheds are highly agricultural, but some of them do have residential areas, urban areas, smaller urban cities out in the rural communities, and so they can also respond to those critical areas. There's another project going on is the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework. The Nature Conservancy is working on a project to get as many of these done in Ohio as quickly as they can. That information supplements what is available for watershed planning because it is looking at best management practices that are responsive to drainage ways. So anything that might capture the water, slow it down, detain it, retain it, and so on. So that helps provide ideas for locations for additional practices to be put in. And you can go to, there is an interactive online map at Ohio EPA where you can go and find all of the various watershed plans. And I don't have on a slide, but I will add here as well that ODA has their 7 regional watershed coordinators now, and those watershed plans are now available at Ohio Department of Ag. That's a very big picture look at the watershed. There's an entire region that's covering basically the area that you see in this map, the western part of northern Ohio. So, but it's looking broadly at the landscape, and part of what that effort is intended to do is come up with the list of best management practices specific to that landscape. So it will include additional practices to suggest to farmers and others in those areas, not just the short list of what's in H2 Ohio, but a broader list of things that should be more broadly applicable in that particular landscape. As you can imagine, Northwest Ohio, largely flat, very clay soils. You might get down into southeastern Ohio. It's very mountainous, completely different landscape. So this is just a way to help ODA organize some of the best management practices statewide. So those are the efforts that have been going on so far under the previous domestic action plan. And talk a little bit now about what's new in the coming 2023 plan, which we have posted online, just to highlight a few of the things that are new in there. So we have a lot of project and program updates. We have been adapting programs as things have been put out. I thought a little bit about how it was working, come up with new ideas for how to make it better. For example, in H2 Ohio, ODA had originally opened the program for the top 6 practices. It became apparent that farmers needed that voluntary nutrient management plan first. So that was an adjustment made to the program. There's also other adjustments that you will see in the DAP Appendix B, where it's been slightly reorganized a little bit. What had formerly been known as Senate Bill 299 programs have now been pulled in under H2 Ohio into that structure as well. We've also done a lot of improvements on tracking and reporting. There are a number of web portals that are all linked from h2.ohio.gov that will tell you all about different practices and locations of those practices. And ODA is continuing work on that front. They have a new program they're setting up called My Farms that's going to enable them to more efficiently capture additional information about the farms and the fields that are in the program so that we can better, they can better administer the program, but also we'll have more information when we want to analyze how much load reduction is going on. Another thing that is has been worked on is target setting, and Josh is going to talk about that in a little bit. We have adjusted the target for the Portage River. It is just established. We have more information on flow. It became apparent that the prior target wasn't exactly where we wanted it to be, so it's been lowered slightly to be more reflective of conditions. There's also discussion on what to do about targets for the Huron River and the Grand River. We have also, the TMDL was a major effort, obviously, of Ohio EPA over the past couple of years, and that has slightly adjusted the distribution of the far field loads that we had. And so we've made those changes in Appendix A of the Domestic Action Plan 2023. We're also working on incorporating new information from and new ideas for research and modeling. We had hoped to have the results from the H2 Ohio watershed model. They are due to complete that at the end of December. So we are having some initial discussions with them coming in November. The gist of it is we know from prior work, and it's again going to be incoming work, that we need a very large penetrance of our best management practices across our agricultural landscape. So, you know, 70% plus of fields being put under some sort of better or best management practice to decrease the amount of phosphorus that's being lost from those fields. So that's we will be looking to see the more specific results there, but generally speaking, it should be in line with what they've found before. And we've also got We had done a big project called the Technology Assessment Program, and Jim Fath is here today. He'll talk a little bit more about that. We've had a lot of folks pop up with their technology ideas, and we're studying those. We will be hoping to move them out of the study phase and start doing some demonstration projects coming, but we've got our short list and some of those have already been funded. So I'm gonna take a little breath here. I cannot see if there are content questions so far. Mary, is there anything that we should respond to so far?
I don't see any hand raised or any chats in yet.
Okay, questions in the room? Rick?
One question related to the Huron River,
Mm-hmm.
having lived right immediately and voted in this area. There are a lot of periods where we have significant northeast and eastern flows. And I know that the Huron River impacts Western Basin. So anyhow, when you get the amount of, and my observations of what Huron River looks like makes it a serious issue.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, so.
I'm gonna put that in the parking lot for when Josh comes up, because
Again, this is a serious component of Western Basin along with the other watersheds that you're talking about.
yeah, the Huron River is one of the priority trips under Annex 4, and so we are continuing. We had, that's another thing that's happened since the last DAP is we put in a monitoring station there now so that it's getting the kind of monitoring that will allow us to calculate loads there. And speaking of loads, I'll talk a little bit about load reductions. So I have from H2 Ohio, this is just a handy slide to have. It translates the metric ton targets from the Annex 4 documentation into pound targets for just Ohio. So we know that the baseline phosphorus load from the Maumee River is around 2.5 million pounds, and the target is around 1.5 million pounds. So we're looking for about a 1 million pound reduction. That's a reduction that has to happen year after year after year in order for us to stay at that 1.5 million pounds, which would be where we're going to achieve the target. So with that little refresher in mind, from H2 Ohio, we have the annual report 2023 from H2 Ohio is now available at the h2.ohio.gov website. And the directors will be doing a webinar to talk about that report specifically and do a deep dive on H2 Ohio and its accomplishments so far. I believe it's currently scheduled for November 6th. So keep an eye out for that. Not sure if that date will hold, but there's definitely will be coming up. So where we're at now and looking at this, estimates for H2 Ohio projects, Ohio EPA about 400 pounds, Ohio Department of Natural Resources, I think this is the statewide number, 132,000. The Lake Erie alone number is that percentage of that, probably more than half, maybe like 2/3 of that, because most of the initial projects have been in the Lake Erie watershed. And then ODA, to date, all of ODA's projects have been for the Western Basin. So all of their loading is about 317,000. So we're not quite halfway in terms of programmatic reductions, but we're getting there, getting pretty close. And we do have the state budget will allow us to continue to work on H2 Ohio. So we're hoping to get a little farther along with that as well. As far as status of the resource, so we know we've had some bad years in the past, 2011, 2015, obviously visible from satellite. I have collected together on one slide for you to take a look at here, a lot of the information that we have on the status of the resource. So on the left-hand side from the water monitoring summary is the flow weighted mean concentrations for the Maumee River at Waterville. On the right-hand side of this chart are two different ways of looking at the lake itself. The integrated report use assessment and the HAB severity index from NOAA. So what we see on the left-hand side, and I have updated these just yesterday from Laura Johnson. So that dot on the very far right for both of those is 2023. And I have the yellow line is the 20% towards the target, and the red line is the 40% reduction target number that we're going for, which is 0.23 for phosphorus and 0.05 for DRP. And you can see that, you know, we have at times flirted with the 20% line. The phosphorus, the total phosphorus flow weighted mean concentrations kind of going up and down a little bit. The bright blue dot in both of those is highlighting 2008, which was our baseline year. So with total phosphorus, not really seeing much of a trend. It kind of goes up and down. The DRP, we're very encouraged to see that in the last several years, the DRP flow weighted mean concentration is lower than it has been in the past. And we think that's part of why the Bloom Severity Index and the Integrated Report Use Assessment have been not as high as they have been in the past. So we don't have a way of specifically distinguishing a reason why. You know, we certainly have been doing a lot of work to reduce our loadings and concentrations. So we hope that's a result of management actions, but we have not been able to fully distinguish that from flow. The flow weighted mean concentration is meant to control for flow, which is by far the major factor that is driving loads. It's not completely perfect situation. At any rate, things aren't getting worse. And then the Integrated Report Use Assessment in the top right-hand side here, each one of those numbers is the number of frames per season over the course of the recreational season on Lake Erie. So basically through the summer, a little bit of the spring through the summer into the early fall. Typically 10 or 11 frames. Last year there were 13 frames because the season went on a little bit longer than normal. So you can see that what we're looking for there is 6 years in a row of 2 or less in order to declare it unimpaired, I guess. So not there yet. Had a couple of years that were a little bit lower. 2020 was a bit of a dry year. 2021, obviously in 2022, it came back up again a little bit. We're waiting on to see that number published in the integrated report, but I have a little sneak preview in there. And then the Bloom severity data is basically a very similar data set. It's all the remote sensing data. So both of those two are very much running in parallel because it's very similar analysis. And so you can see again, not quite down to that objective level, although it has come down a few times. So what we're looking at here, so US EPA and Environment and Climate Change Canada, the parties, the states Annex 4 subcommittee has been working on a binational adaptive management evaluation. And the hope had been to have it out well in advance of the DAPS. It is a gigantic piece of work because it is all of the priority tributaries for both countries and all the states and all of the different permutations of loads and concentrations and phosphorus and DRP and so on. So there's a lot of information there. But this is sort of this similar, this is the load now for soluble reactive phosphorus, which is essentially the same as what we call DRP. You can see with the discharge volume on there that the loads go up and down with the discharge volume very strongly. This is just to note that they will highlight the 5 years immediately prior. So it goes up through 2021, I think. 2017 through 2021 will be their 5-year evaluation period, and they're planning to move that chart. They will also, I believe they would like to have this out in time for the Great Lakes Executive Committee meeting in December. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to put this out very soon. Just to show that we see that we are not yet meeting the targets, although we have definitely had a few years where it's gotten kind of close. There's another method of looking at our resource data that Annex 4 has been looking at. And so this is from a published paper. This is called the weighted regression of time, discharge, and season. It's another way of attempting to reduce the effect of flow, because we know that flows go up in the spring, so that's a seasonal effect. And we know that flows go up and down every day, so that's a time effect. So they're trying to control for all of that information to look at just is the concentration of the DRP in this case changing. And so this data set also is suggesting that DRP is coming down. Certainly does not appear to be going up. So it's encouraging news. It does not, again, it does not point specifically to why, but we continue to evaluate what this means at the Annex 4 subcommittee level. And also, obviously, for Ohio, this is very important information to have as we move into the TMDL and the Domestic Action Plan. So that's our status so far. Just going to talk a little bit more about where we're at with the Domestic Action Plan. So with our timeline, we have been working on this since February. We've met with several groups, not absolutely everybody that we could possibly have met with, but folks who reached out to us. We did our workshop in the spring on April 20th. That workshop is posted at our YouTube channel. I'm hoping that we will be able to get a recording from this meeting as well and post that. We've been doing editing and revisions. This is our public meeting here in October. We are hoping to, we will do a 30-day period for folks to submit comments. And then we will move into final editing and revisions, hopefully final reviews in December. And there should be an Annex 4 webinar. It's being planned for December. We should be able to present some of our information from our DAP there as well. But the idea, our plan is to have this finalized by the end of December. And just to note, again, a lot of detailed information on H2 Ohio that's available at h2.ohio.gov. What I have asked our agency partners to speak to you about today is to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into some of the practices and programs that they're working on, because the directors will be covering sort of the big picture on H2 Ohio. So I'm hoping that you can get some sense of what it's like a little closer to the ground as we are doing these projects in our Domestic Action Plan. So please watch for an announcement coming for that webinar. And again, that's the date that I have so far. I'm not sure if that's going to hold or not, but so look for that coming. And that is what I have for my presentation. I am going to turn it over to ODA next. Mary, any questions while we get this switched over?
We did get one in the chat from Ben Pushka. He was asking, I think it was for the earlier section, but for the fertilization certification program, what % of farmers are participating and what % don't recertify?
I don't know. Kirk is going to be up next anyway, so let's see here.
Well, good afternoon. This is Kirk Hines and work for the Ohio Department of Agriculture. I will certainly start with the question that was presented to us. And so really with the certification program for fertilized through the Department of Agriculture, anyone that, is applying in excess of 50 acres is required to be certified. So great question, and one that I can get back with on in terms of how many recertify, but really it's, it is a requirement that if you're over that 50 acres. So I would expect that that number does not change a whole lot from year to year. You know, and really it's, again, it's on a 3-year cycle. So hopefully I answered that question. So, and I'll just go ahead and keep moving forward here. So, you know, it's great to hear from Sandra, and really hear the status of where we're at. So from the Department of Agriculture, you know, a lot of our focus is on acres and producers. And so it's always good to also think about it, you know, beyond that, what's happening in terms of algal blooms and what's happening at, you know, at the end of the Maumee and those sort of things. So, you know, but I think from our standpoint and what I want to share is, a lot of our goals and a lot of what we're doing for the DAP and for H2 Ohio is really looking, you know, at those numbers. And then, you know, we're certainly hopeful that those numbers relate over time. There could be a lag into what we're seeing downstream. So, you know, just to start with and what we're doing in terms of the DAP and again with H2 Ohio, and really it is new and exciting for us. You know, when I say we want to get nutrient load reductions, that seems like an obvious, and we want to see improved water quality. But really, as we've thought about this, and I think what we're targeting, you know, in the past couple of years with H2 Ohio and what we're really targeting into the future related to the DAP is to look at really 3 different blocks, and certainly nutrient management, erosion management, and water management. But if you think about that in terms of what we've done through the Department of Agriculture, you know, along with our partners with the soil and water districts and USDA, NRCS, we focused for a long time on erosion management. But I would say is, you know, as we started thinking about loads, as we started thinking about dissolved reactive phosphorus, SRP, and et cetera, we really realized that we needed to focus on water management, nutrient management. And I don't want to say that we never did, but those are certainly two new areas for us. With nutrient management, really that gets into looking at nutrient management plans. And certainly that is important. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And then, you know, water management, really looking at
Sharing stuff. We can try.
Yep. Did I do something? So in terms of water management, we're continuing to look at other areas, whether again that'd be conservation ditches, which would be over wide channels or 2-stage ditches, looking at drainage tile and controlled drainage, phosphorus fillers, and other things. So these are certainly new areas, you know, that we're looking at in terms of providing technical assistance and cost share on, and we think will certainly continue and to improve as we move on. I'm froze, Sandra, maybe. Sandra, I think I'm froze.
We can see the PowerPoint and we can still hear you.
Can you get me moved?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, yeah, so thank you. And sorry for my challenges here. So, you know, but as we look at, as you know, again, as we look at those areas of nutrient management, erosion management, water management, certainly we're, you know, with the Department of Agriculture and certainly our partners at the soil and water districts, we continue to look at cropland. And we talked earlier, you know, maybe that's 70 to 90, 80%, somewhere in that range, but really looking at how we can influence the crop management with producers. And if you look here at this map, you know, I certainly didn't count the dots, but just a density map of what counties obviously we're working in, and then how many producers that they're focused in on, and how many producers are enrolled in this program. So should be in excess of 2,000 dots on there, at least it represents that. And so, you know, so that's really neat. But what we're really doing is obviously, and I talked about focusing on the nutrient management plans, and Sandra did as well. You know, that's really a start, but then moving out into those practices and it's sort of those 3 blocks that we talked about. Obviously, you know, it starts with encouraging the proper nutrient application rates, and avoiding over application. And here I just want to pause and share some numbers that I don't have really here on the slides to share with you, but just a couple. And if you think about that, we've worked with the Fertilized Institute and Ohio State and others, but really looked at soil testing and what those numbers. And if we go back to 2005, we can say that there's approximately, you know, represented about 80,000 soil tests really in this region and a little broader in Western Ohio. But if we just looked at that soil test phosphorus, that number would have been on average would have been around 34 for that. And then if we moved to 2020 and looked at that same region, more soil tests represented. I think we're around 270,000 soil tests then, but that number reduces to 26. So, just another way to measure success. And again, we hope that that results, and we realize there'll be a lag in harmful algal blooms and what that does. But if you think about those numbers, it's about a 25% reduction in the soil test phosphorus. So we think, USDA, soil and water districts really having a lot of success in sharing with producers not to continue to apply in areas you don't need. And again, they wouldn't do that on purpose. And I don't think that's done a whole lot anymore. And you can see those reductions. So really that's what we're doing. And we hope these additional practices continue to do that as well. So looking at, specifically in these areas and in the maps that we shared, about 1.4 million acres of plans have been developed, and we've reviewed those nutrient management plans. You can certainly look at the chart on the right, and you can see all the practices. So again, we start with that nutrient management plan, that VNMP, and a lot of success in that. But once we get that, then we really look at these other practices. So precision application of the nutrients, subsurface phosphorus placement, which means we put that phosphorus an inch or two underneath the surface. Manure incorporation, which also looks at where you're applying it and making sure that that's in line with 590, which is our waste application standard. Overwintering cover crops, those sort of areas. But really just want to highlight here that, I think a lot of plans are done in time with whether it be a conservation plan or a nutrient management plan. But this process that we're doing with H2 Ohio and looking at TDAP comes back every year and asks producers, not only what is the plan, but what are your records and how do you do that and how are you doing that? So it really provides that follow-up, which is something that a lot of times we seem not to have in the conservation world. We're great at putting the dollars out and getting the practices installed, but where's our follow-up? This is an area where that follow-up continues to happen with H2 Ohio. So just moving forward, I think I've talked a lot about the nutrient management plans. Just want to talk a little bit real specific now just about water management, even more specific with conservation ditches, which I shared with you all is, we're really talking about overwide channels or two-stage ditches. I would say this is just one small part of what we're doing with H2 Ohio, but it's a new part, it's an exciting part, and something that we'll continue to emphasize and increase over time. So, conservation ditches, we talked about what they are. But what the beauty of these are, it provides additional drainage for producers, which is needed in many cases, but it also provides some conservation and some environmental benefits, which includes water storage, reducing those flow velocities, allows the sediment obviously to drop out, and then results in nutrient load reductions. And again, whether that's a sink or whether it's assimilated, we're really excited about what those do. So again, here, I mentioned to you, sort of a big program that we're doing and DNR and EPA and other partners with H2 Ohio. But, this is just one subset of that. So, initially only about $4 million. I think you'll see that grow exponentially. But here's 11 projects that were somewhat of a pilot. We allowed all counties to apply, and we funded most of those. There are some limitations here, obviously always in dollars, but not so much that as we're asking soil and water districts and county engineers to flow through here with us and to really oversee these projects. So, it's going to be limited on the amount that they can implement, but we think it'll continue to reoccur year after year after year. So 11 ditch projects, about 8 miles of ditches, about 17,000 acres that, flow into this. So, and we're continuing that. We're actually going out statewide with it. We're opening that back up again in 23, 24 for additional projects. So again, we're hoping to see these doubled and they'll continue to grow throughout the years. So as I continue to move, hopefully this, Linda, just real briefly share this slide and this video if we can. And I'm looking to Sandra to help, but I'll go ahead and introduce it. And so this is in really Lucas County that we went out and started working, and what you'll hear here if we're getting it ready to move is just the success that Lucas County is really looking to put a lot of programs and ditches on this program. So again, we're excited about that program and, you know, excited to hear county engineers looking to do as many of these channels, certainly that are under maintenance as they can. So just in conclusion here, I just wanted to talk about program goals. So I've shared a lot, but, you know, most importantly, since really our division came about to the Department of Agriculture in 2016, you know, and I can say this $50 million that's identified here through the Ohio legislature, through our administration, through the governor, you know, that's provided to ODA, that's then provided out to through some of our districts to farmers. You know, we're talking 98% of that is moving out there. This would be probably quadruple any budget that we've ever had, you know, starting looking in 2016 moving forward. So, you know, in terms of the investment in conservation, the investment through H2 Ohio to these kind of projects is just, again, it's, you know, it's more than quadrupled and really amazing. So, you know, I mentioned a little bit ago for these areas, I think we've currently enrolled. So in these 24 counties that's shown on this map, you know, again, if we look back to 2016 in terms of H2 Ohio, that would have been 0. We're now at 1.4 million acres. Looking at what we'll do moving forward, we're hoping that number grows to about 2 million acres. And you know, right now we're probably we say 1 in every 3 fields as you're driving down the interstate or the highways would be enrolled in H2 Ohio in these areas. And, you know, our new goal is to get to 50%. And then Sandra, we're hopeful that that'll start getting us closer to the goals that we've outlined with the DAP and other areas. So we certainly got a long ways to go, but we think we're having a lot of success in getting there. So that really does conclude me. I think I've used probably more than my allotted time, but it was a pleasure to get to present today. Yeah, so yeah, question.
This is Mary online, and we were not able to hear online the volume from that audio from that video. Can you put in the chat the link to the YouTube video so folks can take a look later? Or if you know the title, I can find it on Ags.
I'm not sure if I have a link to that. If you can see if you can get it from Lauren Niner.
Okay.
Go ahead with I think that was the only thing I had on mine.
Okay. Yep.
To the NRCS 590 standard, and there were some important thresholds that were adopted as a part of that update, including some prohibition of application based on certain soil test level thresholds, whether it applies to commercial fertilizer or land application of manure. And that, as well as, and there's another bracket of soil test levels where we don't would be allowable would only be 50% of crop removal rates. And at the time, Terry Mesha had said that same standard would be utilized in the BNMPs as part of the H2 Ohio program. And I understand that it's impossible to assess the impact of that, but I am looking for verification that those are the thresholds being applied as part of the BNMP review by ODA.
Yeah, and yeah, I would want to get, you know, to get real specific to your answer, I probably need to communicate with staff. But, you know, my understanding is, and so what I'm sharing with you is, you know, just a very broad sense of those levels. So a lot of times, you know, it's referred to as the agronomic levels and then the sort of the environmental levels. So we do follow. So to answer your question, with H2 Ohio, we do follow those levels. Now those levels are certainly different based on livestock within 590 and then cropland. You know, there is different levels with the agronomic and the environmental, but we are following those with H2 Ohio with both areas of agriculture, cropland, and then agricultural livestock. Sure.
Follow-up comment is that in that review and in that update, we were fairly intentional about trying to veer away from that language of the agronomic level and the environmental level, because it's all about the same levels.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would look, you know, perhaps, and this is a follow-up, you know, for follow-up by Terry, but I'd be really interested to know that the table that we adopted as part of the 590 is being used for the BNMP review.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, if it's a livestock facility that's doing the manure incorporation and transfer, we're following those agronomics. So we're really following the lower levels in those. Now, it's certainly possible with an operation that may not be doing incorporation. They are doing other areas that it's possible that they're looking at the different levels. But
Yeah,
with H2 Ohio, we really are following that higher level, those higher requirements and standard with anyone that's enrolled through H2 Ohio. Question?
In your, what, in your water quality response actions that you were indicating, relative to nutrients, erosion, and water quality issues, the soil health aspect was not approached. You had just cover crops, but the reality is we have found soil health is a critical aspect of runoff, nutrient retention, and water retention. And cover crop is one aspect of it. Utilization of no-till with cover crops is the next phase up. And relative to water quality, we have found the soil health is probably the #1 reality item that we need to address. And this has been in multiple states that we've been involved with.
Yeah, well, you're speaking from our heart, obviously being the Division of Soil Water Conservation, we're completely endorse soil health, and we'll continue to do that. I think, in terms of these practices, we're really looking at dates of 2025, and we see soil health obviously as a long-term solution to a lot of things we do. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think in terms of practices, we really looked ideally at those ones that were directionally correct. And, we're really working like with Kevin King, with USDA, ARS, and trying to look at those practices where we can, where we have a control site, paired sites with a control, and then where we're doing basically the experiment and seeing what that impact is. So initially, we're really following a lot of that data. I think soil health over time, hopefully we see that sort of same thing. But, we do believe that cover crops, crop rotation, those sort of things get to soil health. So we do believe that that's part of this program. So absolutely.
Sauce. I'm the H2 Ohio program manager for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. So I want to give a little overview of what we're doing with our part of the H2 Ohio program. And we were asked to mix it up a little bit today. So we're going to zoom in on one of our project areas and really talk about some of the work that's being done on that project from the monitoring end of things. I really enjoyed the conservation ditch aspect of your presentation, Kirk. I mean, that's definitely, we usually get to be the ones showing the pretty pictures, but I liked that you got to show some pollinator habitat there and the overwides and the two-stage, and that's really cool. That kind of structural approach to our water quality issues is really where we're coming from with ODNR. And so we call the work that we are deploying across the landscape natural infrastructure. And when we have the two-stage ditches, the overwide ditches, wetland restoration, reforesting riparian stream buffers, this natural infrastructure approach, we know it to be cost-effective from a nutrient reduction standpoint. These are relatively long-term approaches. And of course, when we say we love wetlands at ODNR, we love wetlands for a whole lot of reasons. Not least of which, in this part of the state and in the northwestern corner of the state, the ecosystem services that were once provided by vast tracts of wetlands are largely missing these days in our landscape. And so we're trying to strategically put back some of these important pieces of natural infrastructure in places where they can help us move the needle in terms of water quality. And we know we can't do this alone. We can't do this without the engagement of the agricultural community and the hard work that ODA is doing with their H2 Ohio program. We are a piece of the puzzle. This is a collaborative effort across state agencies. So what we try to do is marry nutrient management with habitat restoration. So where we can find a place on the landscape where we can restore a key piece of wetland habitat in a way that manages nutrients as they flow across the landscape, That's where we invest our project funding, and we have invested heavily in that approach. So just some key components of our program. We do a few different things under that natural infrastructure umbrella at ODNR. We fund natural infrastructure projects like wetland restoration at 100% of the project cost. We're a grant funding program in from that standpoint. A subset of that work, we partner with the Lake Erie Conservation Reserve and Enhancement Program, and we add state dollars as additional incentive on private land, wetland restoration, floodplain wetland restoration, and reforesting riparian buffers. That piece, I sometimes forget that the private lands work that we're doing in partnership with Lake Erie CREP, the sum total of those projects is about as many projects as we have grant funded at this point. That takes us to about 300 wetland restoration and similar types of projects that we have jointly set forth either through our grant funding or on private lands since 2019. And then in this talk, I'm going to focus a little bit more than I usually do on the wetland monitoring program. Again, that's kind of almost a standalone deliverable of our H2Ohio program. The way that we have directly engaged with the academic community and asked them to help us hold ourselves accountable for the nutrient reduction benefits of the projects that we fund. And then with support from the Federal Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, their Focus Area 5, we have 2 H2Ohio naturalists who take our program into the classroom and out to our project sites, engaging the next generation of scientists and engineers and folks who are going to help us lead this charge. So this is what our program implementation looks like on the map view. You can see that just geographically, our emphasis has been in that yellow outlined northwest quadrant of Ohio, the larger Western Lake Erie Basin. ODNR's H2Ohio program operates on a statewide basis now, with primary emphasis and our primary funding allotment still in Northwest Ohio. About 60% of our annual funding is allocated to project work in the Western Lake Erie Basin. And our by the numbers dashboard, I was talking to a colleague before the call here. We are aggressively pushing wetland restoration projects in a way that I think not very many people are. We can't keep our numbers up to date. We're moving projects forward that quickly. We're at about actually 156 projects or so. I think we signed 2 contracts last night to move 2 projects forward in Sandusky Bay. But this is approximately the impact that we're looking at with the allocation that we've made so far. Working with 70 different NGOs, municipalities, soil and water conservation districts, to move this project work forward, accounting for it's approaching 16,000 acres of wetland and associated habitat that will be restored, enhanced, or created through our funding. So I want to kind of dial in on one of those dots on the map in the context of that wetland monitoring program that I was talking about. We're very excited about the restoration work that we're getting done on the landscape. We have about 55 or so completed grant-funded projects at this point, and probably 90 plus private lands restoration projects. But I want to talk today a little bit more about that accountability piece and how we're helping advance the state of the science when it comes to natural infrastructure and the relationship between that and water quality. You're probably familiar with the phrasing, the kidneys of the landscape with wetlands. But we know that is a little bit of an oversimplification sometimes. As we fund multitudes of project work, there are opportunities to look at which are better designs than others when it comes to wetland restoration. Where are places on the landscape where we should be really emphasizing this? What types of designs work better than others. So we engage directly with the Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Network with a grant award agreement to ask them to build a wetland monitoring program and implement that wetland monitoring program for our completed projects. So in doing so, they're going to help us evaluate the effectiveness of our projects, measuring the change in phosphorus and nitrogen as they move across the landscape and interact with our project work. And of course, looking at the flow in these systems as well, because we know that nutrient loading is not just nutrient concentrations, it's also the water that carries those nutrients downstream and how we can interact with that water, hold and store nutrients. The cast of characters here working on our monitoring program. Half a dozen of our key institutions in Ohio for answering these questions. We're very fortunate to have wetland ecology, soil science, vegetation, water quality expertise right at our fingertips with this program. So it's kind of a nexus here between the academic community, the grantees that we work with, and then the managers of our program itself at ODNR. And it's sort of an adaptive management framework where we're asking the research community to report back on our project work, and as we compare the estimates that we've made for the phosphorus reduction we're going to get out of our projects and the numbers that they're coming up with and close that gap, we can be better at delivering our next round of estimates for our projects and better understanding the impacts of the work that we've funded so far. So the accomplishments of the monitoring program itself to date, they collectively created a monitoring framework that was evaluated by internal and external members of the scientific community. They've developed a centralized data management hub and quality control for all the data coming in on these projects. Lots of key partnerships with the landowners and the different conservation organizations we're working with to get the restoration project work done, bringing them into the conversation, sharing ideas about design, even with preliminary results. And of course, engaging the community as well. The project I want to talk about specifically in Hancock County, Oakwoods Nature Preserve, one of the focal projects on this map, one of the starred dots on the map here. Intensive monitoring happening at a few of our sites where we can kind of extrapolate that data to the multitude of other restoration projects. One of the cool things about that site and others, we actually have a local middle school that is involved in monitoring the hydrology of some of the pools on that site, and they can help us keep tabs on the water levels and how that contributes to the loading in those systems and when they visit from the next door middle school. So I'll flip to that now. So that's our Oakwoods Nature Preserve in Hancock County. We did this restoration project in coordination with Hancock County Parks. It's about a 140-acre project altogether. It kind of links some existing Category 3 wetlands across some former agricultural fields to Orland Run, which is part of the Blanchard River watershed. Restoring wetlands, expanding floodplain capacity, and expanding the riparian buffer at this site. So some of the kinds of data that are being collected here, nutrient concentrations in and out of the system, water quality measurements, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity, turbidity, temperature. Taking a careful look at the soil chemistry. We know that soil chemistry is one of those kind of hidden factors that actually can impact the performance of a wetland project in a big way. What is the phosphorus absorption capacity of the soils? And of course, monitoring the hydrology as well in order to be able to determine nutrient loading. So again, this is going to help us understand our decision-making process, help us inform our decision-making process, understand the value of the projects that we have funded to date. And of course, we can then better inform our own approach and others who are involved in natural infrastructure restoration with a water quality focus. I do want to give a quick acknowledgement to Dr. Bob Midden with Bowling Green State University. I borrowed a few of those slides from him, and I appreciate that. The monitoring program has been a big help to us in so many ways. I really appreciate that. So questions? Yeah.
When I got the investment in the monitoring, I think that's really terrific. And my question is, is there any sort of plan in place should you happen to identify a wetland becoming a source of nutrients versus a sink?
Certainly.
That it could take emergency action in the interest of trying to crank down that faucet of floating into the lake.
Yeah. I'm not sure how well folks can hear online, so I'll repeat the question. When we fully anticipate, as we're looking at all the projects that we've put on the landscape, some of them are going to perform better than others. And so what happens when we find one that is bleeding phosphorus? And it may be something that performs well for a while, and then we see some red flags. This has been the case with some of the wetland treatment trains at Grand Lake St. Mary's, and the importance of keeping tabs on the nutrient budget of those projects. There are things that can be done. We know, for example, with actually the project that's in the background of this image, this is not in the Lake Erie watershed. This is Brooks Park Wetland Restoration at Buckeye Lake. That particular project has an area that is designated as a sediment trap. As Murphy's Run comes into this project area, there's a specific part of the project that is designated for maintenance. For every 3 to 5 years, we anticipate we'll need to pull sediment out of there, put it in a DMRA or up in the farm field. Some of our sites have very specific maintenance objectives like that. Others, we may just have to keep our eyes on and continue monitoring those projects. There are soil amendments that can be done. And I think maybe that might be something that's alluded to a little bit with our technology assessment program, but there are adjustments that can be made. Yeah.
Has your monitoring program engaged possible maintenance actions to deal with various aspects of sediment loading and invasive species?
Yes, we do with many of our projects fund a period of invasive species management for a couple of years following the project. We try to work with folks like Hancock Parks, for example, who have a vested interest in managing that on a long-term basis. But I think there is an opportunity for our program to look closely at how we could support longer-term O&M on these projects.
Another item is, recent legislation in the last couple of years has taken away the protections on ephemeral wetlands and waterways as a direct affront to what I think good water quality management is. And have you noted any impacts of these decision making by our legislative representatives and how it's impacted our water quality in our region?
Yeah, well, I can speak to that in 2 ways. Firstly, with our specific project work, we put protections in place above and beyond any Clean Water Act protections, just to protect the investment in those projects, conservation easements, environmental covenants, and the like. Now, with other wetlands in Ohio, of course, as we're trying to expand the acreage of wetlands, we don't want to be, pushing forward in one way and then seeing backtracking in the other regard. We are fortunate here in Ohio that we have an isolated wetland program with Ohio EPA that has protections for isolated wetlands. Many other states don't, and I think that's where Ohio is actually kind of leading the way and is you know, they're providing a model for what other states might need to do to cover that gap.
Isolated different than.
The ephemeral streams and isolated wetlands are a different topic.
And the reality is, if you don't sustain their existence, they tend to reappear and cause a lot of complicated problems down the way.
Yeah.
So, you know, anyhow, that.
I will acknowledge that, and I would say that my colleagues at Ohio EPA, they're the ones who could probably best speak to the wetland protections we have in Ohio. Yep.
Thank you, Eric. We're gonna move into Ohio EPA. We have Jim Fath and Josh Griffin here with us today. Slides.
So yeah, I'm Josh Griffin at Ohio EPA. I've been working, most recently worked on the Maumee TMDL, one of our bigger projects identified as an action in the previous DAP. So we'll talk a little bit about what that changed in the DAP today. But before I get into some of those kind of just general DAP updates, I have Jim Fath with me. He's going to take some time to talk through some of the technology aspects and things and ways that we're evaluating technologies and a role and roles that they could play in improving nutrient management. So I put the slides together in the opposite direction of that, so I got to jump ahead real quick, and then we'll go back to my slides here later. So.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Jim Fath, Ohio EPA. Glad to be here, be able to share with you about something that I like. I have a technology assessment program, H2 Ohio TAP. Sandra had talked about strategy 1, actions to address nutrient loss from agriculture, and that's what this is talking about here. So a little bit of history. In 2020, Ohio EPA solicited a request for technology assessments. Over 40 proposals were received. Out of those 40, we picked 10 were picked to look at for further evaluation. And from those 10, 5 were pursuing GLRI funding, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. And those 5 are what I'm going to be talking about today. So funding we've received so far, so federal fiscal year 23, we've gotten 2 grants in. The first grant, so we have 2 grants, 4 technologies, 3 projects, if you will. So the first grant was a 1.75 million, and that addresses the quick wash and regen technologies. Those are combined in one project. And then the Struvite DG technology project is with that. And then the second grant, the automated drainage water management, ADWM, 500,000 grant on those. We just got these in. The ADWM is starting in October 1st. Not much has happened. So we don't have a lot happening other than the application process. We've got it. We're moving forward. So I will talk about what we have so far. I should say that the grants are all 100% passed through to the entities doing the technology demonstrations. The last one listed there, the electric cell license, is we haven't applied for that yet. Back on the previous slide, we talked about the combined project of quick wash and regen. This one is the flow diagram for the quick wash process. And as you see that red arrow on the right there, that's what connects it over to the regen process. I'd love to talk about this a little bit, but don't really have time. Just will say that Quick Wash is a solution used to recover phosphorus and ammonium from manure. And this could increase value of the manure to the producer as the nutrient level comes down in the manure. It's licensed to AES, Applied Environmental Solutions, and we are working with Maumee Watershed Alliance. If any of you are familiar with them, for this Regen Quick Wash program. So we have 2 farms in the Maumee watershed that they're going to do the Quick Wash projects on. We've got started on one or about ready to move to the other. AES will track phosphorus and ammonium content in the manure. And then at that red arrow there, that's where it kicks on over to the regen process. Just a quick picture here. That, if you can see it, this is the first farm where they are pulling liquid manure out of the hog farm, right, the house right there. And yeah, it smelled like a hog manure. And this is the operation there. They're almost wrapping up there and we moving to another location. So following that red arrow, the materials, the materials produced from the Quick Wash, you get a screening of, let's see if I can go back to it, following the right side, the screenings, you get a low phosphorus screening that could be used then on the fields. A lot of the phosphorus has been removed and you get a high phosphorus cake. Right, I was just out at the farm a week or so ago, and there were right around 96% of the phosphorus removed from the manure in this process. So those screenings, that high phosphorus cake, follow that red arrow over, comes to the regen process. And grab my notes, which it was mentioned soil health. Soil health is a big thing. The emphasis on the regen process is soil health. So if you look on the lower left corner, this is a lot of inputs coming into the regen process. There's number 2 there. It says processed manure. That's the Quick Wash material coming in. So Kurtz Brothers, they take nutrient residuals and blend it and mix and do what Kurtz Brothers do and produce soil improvement products. In this case, they'll be taking the screenings that the Quick Wash produced, so the low phosphorus screenings. And they'll also take the high phosphorus solids as well and work into their process. They Kurtz Brothers want to produce 4 products out of this material. I should have added that biosolids are also in the mix with this. A soil builder, Regen Organics. Then some of it will be pelletized, and they'll try that with Nutri-Pellets, a Regen char, a biochar, and Nutrisorb filter sock media. So that's the first project. These are Maumee Watershed Alliance and combined projects. The next one on that first 1.75 million grant, this is passed through to Ohio State University, Struvite, and the Struvite's been being provided by the Andersons. So what is Struvite? Magnesium ammonium phosphate. I've heard this and I checked just before I came up. So National Institutes of Health say that of all the kidney stones that come out, about 10% of them are Struvite kidney stones. And I guess just keep that analogy in your mind as we talk through this process. It kind of works. So the Struvite process, if you look on, we have kind of an equation there. On the right side, there's a bunch of small particles. These are 100 mesh particles of Struvite. So they take this and get it into fine particles. Staying with the analogy, like kidney stones, they don't solubilize. They just are stuck there. And I apologize if somebody has kidney stones. it's not, it's a painful analogy, I suppose. So they're not soluble. The struvite is not. So, and if you jump to the left side of the equation, that asteroid-looking ball there, they take the insoluble particles and bind them together with a organic lignin binder, which is water soluble, and that gets used like in place of DAP, MAP, commercial phosphorus fertilizer, same equipment, so forth. Goes onto the field, the water hits that, the theory of the process, it takes it into the soil rapidly because it's soluble at that point. The lignin dissolves and we're left with all these little kidney stones, these little struvite particles, and they're insoluble, so they won't leach out. They'll stay. And as the plant, the rhizosphere of the root zone needs phosphorus, the biochemical reactions, acid is produced, and the phosphorus is taken up into the plant on demand. So it doesn't leach, it's there available for the plant. Ohio State is working with this. We're going to be testing it in 2 settings, plot studies at the Defiance Agricultural Research Association plots out at the Defiance Airport, if you're familiar with that. And there they'll do water quality testing as well as agronomic benefit. And they'll also be doing field studies. Both of these will be in 2 full crop rotations, corn 1 year, soybeans, corn, soybeans. So it'll be a good bit of study. And that is struvite. The other GLRI grant for automated drainage water management is, talk about that now. DWM, drainage water management, NRCS conservation practice for managing tile drainage and in cropland with water quality and agronomic production benefits. ADWM is automated DWM, drainage water management. This is also by working with Ohio State, passed through to Ohio State. They were working with Ecosystem Services Exchange on the project. So they intend to put 10 of these field structures out here where they can control the water level, what's discharged out of the field tiles, what's held back. So it senses the water levels and flows and so forth. Of these 10, 5 will be controlled remotely, and 5 will be controlled by the producers. And this is the plan. These will be in the Lost River watershed with Western Lake Erie Basin. And 2 of these will be selected. Ohio State will do water quality monitoring, water quality and flow and so forth. Both at I guess there's a fair amount of data. Some of you will know better than I on the field tile end, but not a whole lot on running off the top. So they're looking at both edge of field and drainage tile discharge. Ohio State will also develop a web-based decision support tool for practical guidance to the producers. The last one, we don't know much about this. We haven't applied for this yet. We're trying to, so these other projects, we're just getting going. So we want to get them going better. And then we hope to, we'll work with Ohio EPA, with Glenpoe, not Ohio, I'm Ohio EPA, with Glenpoe on maybe this next one. Electric cell lysis. Electric cell lysis is taking no chemicals, just electrical pulses, and it breaks down liquid organic waste, manure, no chemicals. It reduces nutrients, pathogens, and odor. So land applied manure. Again, the producer can spread it, more of it at his locality, doesn't have to go so far out based on this, and results in less nutrient runoff in that way. I'm also told in deep lagoon applications, you get a stratification. The top layer is the stuff we just talked about, low odor, low pathogen, low nutrient, and then a buildup of the rich nutrient comes on the bottom, and that can be then further processed. One last thing, all of these we want to have a strong outreach emphasis. So yeah, academic research benefit and technology development benefit, but it needs to be produced. So if you can have a technology that does great for water quality, but if nobody's using it, nobody's using it. So thank you. And you can ask what. There will be on, yeah, there will be. We don't have that yet. Because yeah, that's key. I was just out at that farm last week. The guy at MWA promoting it was sitting there saying, yeah, this is all good, but to the end of the day, the producers are looking at the spreadsheet and they look at the price for fertilizer, they look at the price of what, in that case, quick wash will be, and they look at the bottom line and it's cheaper. Economics is important.
And so thanks, Jim. That was I think it's nice to bring that information into the conversation. How are we looking at technology, and how are we trying to get more of that on the landscape and understand its role? So my part of our discussion today is just to kind of talk about some of the bigger updates that Ohio EPA made to the DAP. Again, we updated all of our financial information and project implementation work, and that's updated throughout the DAP. I'm not going to focus on that today. It's in the draft report that's out that you all can look at. I'm going to highlight a few things that changed because we completed the Maumee TMDL, and I'm going to highlight some revisions to the tributary target discussion that's in one of the appendices. So relative to the Maumee watershed nutrient TMDL, the current DAP identified that as a priority action for us to accomplish in the coming years. While we've kind of completed that initial TMDL development with the federal decision on September 28th. So very recent activity with that. I think we've been kind of working back and forth with TMDL development, domestic action plan. These things have worked together for quite some time. So we had the far field targets in Appendix A. There are some kind of key TMDL development pieces that change how we need to talk about those targets and how we use them in those non-point source implementation strategies. And also, we've added some updates to Appendix C, where we talk about community sources, because now that we have this TMDL, we have a waste load allocation identified for our point sources. We need to have a permit or have that waste load allocation addressed in our NPDES permits. So we've developed a general watershed permit to kind of add some flexibility to the point source community. We discussed the implementation of that there in that appendix. In Appendix A, we had this map previously, and it really doesn't change a whole lot based on the TMDL. The biggest change was not all runoff from the landscape is treated equal under the Clean Water Act. Some runoff we classify as non-point source. That becomes part of the load allocation. Some runoff from some portions of the developed landscape gets classified as a point source. So these are urbanized areas regulated as we call them MS4 areas. And there are larger urban areas generally, but that regulated component of stormwater, some of the activities to address that pollutant source can't be part of a non-point source reduction strategy. So when we redid the numbers for the work that was in the DAP in 2020, and that really to kind of explain that nuance, we've kind of masked out that portion of the landscape. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do non-point source projects in that part of the watershed. We expect those to be places where we have a lot of partners. That's where we have a lot of people. We'll see two-stage ditches developed in those areas. We'll see wetland restoration activities in those areas. Those things are still non-point source projects. They still contribute to our overall goal, but they can't be recognized as part of the target for that urban component of the goal. And we reflect that a little bit in some of the decisions we made and how we allocated those sources. And we don't say, we don't want the same amount of reduction from those urban sources, because we still want to see those partnerships function. So that was the biggest change based on the TMDL, that in reference to our point source strategy. But the targets, as we've looked at, as we developed the domestic action plan, we've looked at our priority tributaries, and we had the general expression of targets of 40% reduction from the 2008 baseline loading condition. We didn't have 2008 loads for all of our tributaries, so we didn't have numeric loading targets for all of our tributaries, so we couldn't necessarily measure the bar against where we were at in that statement. So in the prior DAP, we had went through a process to try to express a numeric target for the Portage River, and at the time we did know it was a very wet year that we chose to base that off of, but we didn't have as much data as we do now, and we hadn't been able to compare it to the loads in an ongoing way. And what we saw in the last 5 years is the target condition we selected for the Portage River was met most of the years, though the flow weighted mean concentrations and activities and anything we would expect would have said that, well, it really shouldn't look that much different than what we see in the Maumee and Sandusky rivers right beside it, who've had similar levels of implementation and change. And similar types of activities going on. So we wanted to look at that again. And when we kind of re-looked at the numbers, we said, well, the year we chose was really the wettest year in that time frame we looked at to set the targets for the Annex 4 targets and objective task team was looking at. And well, of course, that's going to exceed, we're going to set a higher target because that was set on a 90th percentile expectation. So 9 out of 10 years, and we have the wettest year. So we looked at the newer data since that time, and the reason why we had to do this for the Portage River is data collection, water quality data collection. We need to calculate those loads didn't start until 2011, so we didn't have it in 2008. So now we have a much bigger data set to look at, and we found a year that is more reflective of that 90th percentile condition. And it gives us a lower loading target, but a more realistic loading target. And it doesn't change really the flow weighted mean expectations for the watershed. It kind of puts everything kind of in line. We see with the new loading target, we see a very similar situation we would see with the Maumee or Sandusky rivers nearby. We also dug into the spring loading targets for the Huron. Loading water quality data we need for those loading calculations started even a bit later for the Huron. We didn't get that. I think it's 2017. I think was the first full year of data we had. Some preliminary stuff ahead of that, but we found something rather interesting, I think, in that data set, and that the total phosphorus is on this top chart. Huron's the gray bar. It looks flow weighted means very similar to our other Northwest Ohio watersheds, but the dissolved reactive phosphorus on the bottom chart, the flow weighted mean concentrations in the last 5 years have they've met those the flow weighted mean goals for the Maumee or Portage or Sandusky. So it just paints a very different picture. So we may have a year that looks like a 90th percentile year, but if we set a dissolved reactive phosphorus target at this point with what we know right now, we would be setting a flow weighted mean expectation for the Portage or for the Huron much lower than the other watersheds. So we didn't set a target or express a target, but we did share the information that we've collected so far and started presenting it in the context of what we know about the other watersheds. So more work to come here for sure. But there's some interesting things going on in the Huron River, to say the least. Another tributary where we have, here we don't have a spring loading target, so these are all annual loads. We're looking at the Grand River over east of Cleveland, and thinking about its role as a priority tributary. and kind of thinking about, well, we don't have data collection there now. We haven't started it again either, but we did get a lot of water quality data from the late 1980s up into the early 2000s, at which time I think people were seeing, well, the loads and concentrations are a lot lower over there. So as we allocate our finite resources, we move them westward. But the result is we don't have that water quality data today, but we wanted to look at that data kind of retrospectively and think about what that means for the Grand River as a priority tributary. And what we see, again, this is an annual loading, total phosphorus target, Central Basin. The flow-weighted mean concentrations in the Grand River are half or lower. And the other things we know about that watershed is that, we don't have as much agriculture over there. We don't really have a lot of people over there in the scheme of Northeast Ohio. So it's a much lesser developed area. And the water quality reflects that. It's also a wetter watershed. So we see actually more discharge volume. It's in the snow belt. So there's some really interesting and unique things about the Grand River. But we just wanted to share the data we did have, introduce that to the conversation about priority tributaries and what are our priorities and how we allocate resources around that. But that's kind of the crux of the story there for the Grand River. That's all I have. Those are kind of the big picture updates. We brought some new information, new data into the DAP.
Questions for Josh in the room or online?
We have one with Sandy in the back.
Adjust. First one, two. Numbers. Permitted and unpermitted. Do anything with our field.
I think as we've looked at manure and commercial fertilizer use and what they mean for far field losses, we see very similar loads transported from fields to Lake Erie. So as those sources of phosphorus change from watershed to watershed, the focus hasn't thus far been on, are you using manure or commercial fertilizer, but on doing better with both things. So we aren't using that to adjust the targets, though the practices that we ultimately end up using to work with landowners within an individual small watershed plan might focus on manure if that plan, because those plans themselves do take a deeper dive. You're closer to the ground. You have a lot more information about what is going on locally. So at that level, you are thinking about working with individuals. So if there is a farm that has livestock and there are opportunities for that farm, that becomes part of that small watershed plan. And we see that, and I've seen examples where we've seen manure storage structures being identified as critical BMPs in a small watershed plan. Starting at the Maumee watershed scale, it's hard to paint that picture. Once you get to that smaller size, there's space to bring that information in.
Josh, can you summarize the question from Sandy for the folks online?
I think the question was do the sub watershed targets and oh, so the
Commercial fertilizer is the same, but their numbers and their impact in the watershed, in reality, what's going on in the watershed, not being.
So the question is, will the livestock component of a sub watershed be counted in the plan? included in the plan. I think my example maybe missed that a little bit, but I think the reality is that sub watershed plan is looking at, or should be looking at, what the sources of phosphorus are. So if there are livestock facilities there, I think there's some effort to do that. Why isn't it universally included? Some of it has to do with the scale that we have data at. Some of our data is county level data. So we do think about that, but at the county level again. Yeah, so we can talk about that. I think as we continue to develop those plans, I think identifying livestock within them, I've certainly seen plans that do identify livestock being there and then emphasize BMPs for livestock.
I really like your local watershed planning in that. What is the status of expanding on this far field effort?
So Sandra brought up that map earlier,
Okay.
and that's updated as we develop new plans. But I think we're in that around 60 of 186 or so HUC 12s in Ohio have a plan or will have a plan, and I think we can't give ourselves a goal to get the rest of the 2/3 of those done immediately. But I think we're certainly looking to take that number up over the next coming years. So
As we engage TMDL criteria on the watersheds that we've identified for TMDL, do you see a transition to more point source identification, monitoring? It seems to me that as the TMDLs reveal the real culprits, that should become a point source.
the TMDL doesn't change the kind of basic definition. So the TMDL kind of classifies certain sources as the Clean Water Act would view them. So non-point sources are still non-point sources when we're done with the TMDL. Point sources are still point sources when we're done with the TMDL.
They have TMDLs identify specific locations of problems, and those transition into a point source.
That's an example I'm not familiar with.
There are watersheds nationally that transition has and is an important part of addressing and correcting.
I think the TMDL, in our case, we view those still as non-point sources, but I think our implementation strategy very much focuses on the need to address those sources to achieve our goals.
Like to kind of roll in example of the Grand River. Some of the other rivers here. Have you taken, or is the EPA or anybody taken a look at the correlation with the fact that much of the Grand River Valley is protected as parkland through like Lake Metro Parks, National Park District and others, and the impact that also has with the watershed?
We haven't done that depth of an analysis, but I think that correlation is certainly front of mind when you see this type of information. I think that much higher percentage of natural areas in that watershed that really aren't managed with phosphorus inputs. There aren't people living there. There aren't point sources. There are very low density of point sources in the Grand River watershed.
I guess the reason I bring that up is it kind of makes a case to leverage for funding to potentially, do more land protection on other stream watersheds and what. Much like that. Just big.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm really encouraged by Smart Lake technology. I attended a presentation on Smart Lake technology at the Healing Our Waters conference this last week. It has a lot of components that I think are extremely critical for our Western Basin in particular. I also see them as an important part to engage citizen science within our local school districts, whether they in higher education units that can bring us more eyes at what's going on
Mhm.
and create more opportunities to improve our water quality. Voluntary programs, I don't see them necessarily working. But the reality is I see the media portion connecting with the eyes that are going to be out there doing these water testing, bringing the public pressure that I think is going to be necessary across the whole northern Ohio region, Lake Erie, that will get the correct decision making made.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, we've got just a few minutes left. I don't see anything in the chat online. If folks have comments or questions they'd like to make online, please do so. The comment we've just had is about smart technology and the benefits that that can have, and feeling that voluntary isn't necessarily the complete way to go. And so we'll continue to make that comment. So if anyone else has comments or questions, we're just kind of opening the floor for the final 5 or so minutes that we've got left here, 5 or 10 minutes. And feel free to chime in by chat online, or I think if we raise your hand, I think we could get you unmuted online as well. Oops. Oh yeah, Sandy, go ahead.
Sense to me, no business would ever function the way Ohio's doing. Anywhere and everywhere, let's just use last for 7 years. Why not target the areas that are great? Better use of resources.
Yeah, we've included, there's a section in the research section that we have just added. Sandy's asking about prioritizing within the watershed. And so we have included a research component in this DAP. It's a new piece to look at ways that we can model better prioritization within the Maumee watershed. We see that as something we need to investigate. We have some limitations on being able to prioritize individual fields because of our not being able to fully access information because of the business proprietary nature of the farm practices themselves. However, we do have other risk factors that can be measured and modeled. So we're going to take a look at that. One challenge that we see in greater prioritization at a subwatershed level is that it's more resource intensive to do so. We feel that farmers know their own soil test phosphorus levels, and if those are farmers that are not reaching out through H2 Ohio already, that additional incentives for those folks might be more expensive. So we're trying to keep, we know this whole thing in the aggregate, this whole method of operating to reduce nutrients is very expensive. And we've seen that in Chesapeake Bay. We've seen it here. It's multiple tens, hundreds, millions of dollars. So we really want to keep our eye on that cost effectiveness, but we will be, we have opened the door to studying how we can do a better job of prioritizing within the watershed.
Sandra, we did get a question online, and also if you can repeat the question.
I'm sorry, I got multiple people talking. I see it, Mary. I'll get to it in just a second.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sandy's got one more follow-up. I'm not sure I understood. Could say again, please? We are, to the extent that that will pop up in our data sets, we can follow up on it. We cannot follow up on it if it doesn't show in the data. All right, and a question I have online. How will the identification of concentrated source areas through the non-point source plans at the HUC 12 level be coordinated with incorporation of BMP or nutrient reduction technologies. That's done at the local level through the implementation of the plans. And a lot of our plans are run through the Soil and Water Conservation District and are at through the county level. And so I would imagine that there's pretty good coordination in that sense, because the H2 Ohio programs are also being run through the county soil and waters. There will be, there are probably some places still where there are watershed coordinators and other organizations that are working on those, but at the local level, they're all pretty well tied together as far as information availability. And we have been working really hard with H2 Ohio to make the information more available about where those projects are going in. I think with My Farms coming out, it'll be easier to tell which fields are actually getting H2 Ohio money as opposed to just which farms. And then will the use of federal grants such as the Inflation Reduction Act be used to evaluate cost effectiveness? We are evaluating cost effectiveness through a range of programs. We've done a whole bunch through the Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative. There's a project underway now looking at effectiveness of two-stage ditches that has a cost component, and the work that's being done through the wetlands with ODNR's Learn program. They have all the information on the cost for those wetlands. So once they get an effectiveness value, they should be able to evaluate cost effectiveness there. There have been other various I'm not coming to mind immediately off the top of my head, but I know that there have been other types of BMPs that have been investigated, and a little bit, some of Kevin King's places where he has got field data are also places where installation of the practice cost is known. And so I don't know if there's future plans on summarizing that work, but that information is available. And we are not updating a cost curve or cost effectiveness of practices in this round of the domestic action plan. All right, other comments or questions? We do have up through November 17th. We are happy to take your comments. They can be sent to DAP, just DAP at lakeerie.ohio.gov. And I'm going to work some more next week on the website, try to get more of the information there, the supporting documentation updated, and make sure that you guys all have that information about how to send in comments. At the moment, the commission is a distributed office environment, so it's difficult for us to receive things in hard copy. However, we do still have a mailbox at Ohio EPA's central office. So if folks need to send something in hard copy, give me a call. We'll figure out how to make that happen. Appreciate everyone's time and attention. We are available. Just reach out if you have additional questions, and I'm happy to talk to folks. Thank you so much for your attention, and I appreciate everyone's patience with continuing to learn into hybrid mode with still incomplete ability to hear everyone. Thank you all.